Hello and welcome back. We are now visiting with Rory Cooney and Paul Inwood, who surely need no introduction, about composing for the liturgy. Paul and Rory are leading this Composers Institute at NPM. It began yesterday for 3 hours and then is continuing throughout the convention for a total of, I think, over 10 hours. I'd like to begin by asking each of you, what happens at an NPM Composers Institute? Who comes? What levels are they at? And how do you work with them?
I'll just start by saying it's surprising to us the breadth of experience and actually the breadth of geography that we're covering. We have people from as far in the Northwest as Portland, all the way to Florida, Maryland, California, North Dakota, about 30 to 35, I'm not sure. And their experience is all over the board. Some have multiple degrees in music. Others do it almost as an avocation, I would say. It's kind of the way I started out.
Yeah, so that presents challenges, and we did this 2 years ago, and actually we got it slightly wrong. So this year we're having a slightly different way of working, and it seems to be going pretty well.
What have you changed?
Well, we gave them assigned tasks beforehand to submit, so that they were all working on the same texts. And we didn't actually have time to do justice to everything that they had brought with them. So this time we asked them just to bring something that they wanted help with, or something that they wanted to share or show, and that's what they've done. We are actually going to give them a little writing task tomorrow. They don't know what it is yet. Something that they can actually do while they're here this week.
We can't mention it because they might be watching.
Indeed, we hope that they are. So this is primarily a master class or a seminar sharing of work. There's not a lot of you lecturing on steps in composing or that sort of thing.
We do a little bit of that at the beginning to sort of level the playing field and to give what we think is some important input in general.
Sort of basic principles, stuff like that.
And the actual format that we've been using is very similar to something we do at our Composers Forum meeting we do every year in St. Louis, which is we bring people those of us who want to, bring works that we've done, and we do kind of mutual and often anonymous evaluation, where the others
kind of blind tasting takes place.
And so that's it's very helpful for them because, like I say, many of them are very highly trained in music, and at the same time, it's in a very loving and affirming environment.
Though they're church musicians,
right.
yet it's a loving environment.
It's a loving environment, but that doesn't mean we're not critical. I mean,
right.
That there's not blood on the floor, but we're fairly honest in what we say.
Yeah.
So you're able to be honest, Paul, and not hold back?
Pretty much.
Oh, good.
I used an adjective yesterday which somebody took out of context and apparently was not totally happy with, but the person at whom it was aimed came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you so much." It was really helpful to hear that.
Well, speaking of being critical, Flannery O'Connor, great writer, was once asked, isn't it the case that our schools are not turning out enough writers and should be doing more to encourage writing? She said, no, I think they're turning out too many and we'd be better off if a lot of them would stop. Now that was Flannery O'Connor. Do you feel that everyone in your institute this year really is a composer who should be encouraged, or what do you do when it doesn't seem like there is talent there? You'll just nurture people at whatever level they're at?
Well, part of it is self-perception, and I think that a certain kind of culling happens at the local level. I mean, at least I don't feel that people who continually are not able to produce at a level that's consistent with what's going on in other places in the country are really going to be able to endure very long. But I mean, as long as there's that kind of fire inside to want to be creative, I don't see any harm, and I only see good in trying to bring out the best in that creative process and help them be the best they can be.
And I would agree with that. And often they may not have the technique or the craft to do what they actually want to do. And so there is a danger of being derivative, shall we say, and even plagiarizing, in the worst possible. And so we're trying to steer them gently away from that and say, if you find yourself writing something which sounds a little bit like, or more than a little bit like, something that somebody else has already written and had published, then just tweak it and put your own original stamp on it and change it slightly so that it's not the same old stuff over and over again.
Sure. Now, actually, the Institute is composers and text writers. So do you deal with textual criticism like a Madeline, now I've forgotten her name, Common Hymn Sense? Or is the focus of your institute here at NPM primarily on the craft of music writing?
I would say that it's primarily music, but a lot of the folks that are doing the pieces or handing in pieces for evaluation have also written or at least adapted the texts. And so we both try to also give them some guidance in that as well. Just some basic, I would say, theological considerations and liturgical considerations.
Basic word setting principles. Sometimes the rhythms don't exactly marry up with what the text is trying to do. Sometimes that appears to be deliberate, and sometimes, quite often it isn't. It's like everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. What sorts of styles and genres are people bringing to this? Is it, for multi-voiced choir, or is it primarily congregational, or was it defined as congregational? Are people sort of assuming it'll be sort of a somewhat contemporary style, or is it some of it more classical, or what is the mix like?
It's been a little bit, I probably favors the more contemporary style, but it's been all over the board, and some of the choral writing is really very good.
But we've had a kind of underpinning theme, if you like, that if it's not accessible to the assembly, even as listeners, then really probably it's not doing what it ought to be doing in liturgy. So even if you're writing for choir, if you're writing, serial music for use during the Eucharist, that's probably not going to help people to pray.
And those people probably don't want any help from me anyway.
But there are people who are bringing choral anthems.
Yes.
Or at least, where the choir plays a large part in the performance of the piece.
We've had choir, choral verses, choral refrains. We've had simple lead sheets. We've got something coming up this evening which has got a full orchestra attached to it. We're not actually going to be able to look at all the orchestral parts because we can't project them on the screen for everyone to see sufficiently. So there's a very wide spectrum of from the simplest to the most complex.
All in English, or also Spanish, or Asian tongues, or Latin?
I haven't actually seen them all. The ones we've done so far have been English.
And the group is primarily English speaking. There's one very charming Latina lady there who in fact has brought along something in English which we haven't looked at yet, and somebody else who is bringing in stuff from South America in Spanish and arranging it and translating it into English. We haven't seen any of that yet either, but I gather that she wants us to look at the English version to see whether that's good, because she assumes the Spanish version is wonderful.
Are there any patterns that you find yourself thinking often and saying over and over certain basic things that there are, sort of common misperceptions or common ways that people need to think about composing?
Well, I think, about the composing question in general, I'm not so sure. But Paul definitely keeps pushing the very craft of the basics of voice leading and
avoiding parallel fifths and octaves between melody and bass line, which happens all the time, particularly in guitar-based compositions, but not exclusively there. And people sometimes scoff at the old rules and say, well, why should we take any notice of that today? We're writing in a different. But actually, those old rules were based not on on something that somebody thought would be a good idea, but actually because in terms of sound, it makes a difference.
Also performability. Sometimes I have noticed in classical or contemporary style music, the altos have to jump from an E to a B flat because the composer needed an E in that chord and a B flat in that one. If they could have sung a C there, and then I find, if I rewrite that, I need to rewrite the tenor, and then I say the whole thing would be more singable if they knew some basic rules.
We've had a bit of that, and we had that 2 years ago, quite a lot. I think the standard is higher so far, the stuff that we've seen. this year than it was 2 years ago. So, which either means that people have been learning something, and from us, or that we're just very lucky.
Yeah, we actually have about maybe as much as 25% of our group are repeat customers from last time. And it's interesting because they have to pay a premium actually at the convention to attend the Institute. So,
and it shuts them out of other offerings.
Right,
so
exactly.
there's that
They're
price.
locked into it for the week, as are we. So they can't go to any other breakout sessions, and there are various other conflicts. We have people, for example, who are also chapter directors, who need to be at the chapter director stuff and can't be, so they're having to send somebody else, and all that kind of thing.
But it must be worth it. I mean, to spend 10.5 hours with 2 published composers must be just a treasured opportunity for the people.
I think it's a treasured opportunity for us as well. We're seeing where the next generation, if you like, of things is going to come from, and you can't do something like this without learning yourself as you go along. Same with any breakout, really.
I want to switch the topic to sort of thinking big picture. Where is composing for Catholic liturgy going? Do you see new trends emerging or things that are changing? We had the need for new mass settings, of course, in 2009 and 2010. Some people will say the era of the big stars is over. I don't know if that's true or not. Are there any mega trends you would identify that are happening in the field?
oh boy. Well, I think that one thing for sure is that the whole business of the recording side of the music has changed, because that whole industry has undergone a complete turnabout in the last 20 to 25 years.
So CDs are no longer a big item to sell at these conventions.
Oh, no, and it makes a huge difference, as anybody who looks at a royalty statement knows. It makes a huge difference in the amount of money that anyone makes on a song or a collection, because the royalties on online and electronic distribution are much lower, and you're not tied into buying an entire collection of music. So that side of it has changed, and probably I would say you could say that therefore the industry itself has changed, except that people who write music write it because we want to write it, and the recordings are important, but as you go through it you see that what really ends up mattering is the song or the music itself, and how that's received by the church and how the church is able to use it. And the recorded part may have been sort of a vanity thing anyway, because it was never that big a part of the economic picture anyway. It's most of us who are able to make any money as composers make it from sales of sheet music, and especially hymnals and that sort of thing.
That's absolutely true, but I think that's going to change. I think the electronic thing is coming up now.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think in 10 years' time, royalty statements will look very different. And I think that gives publishers an opportunity to do. I mean, I know at least one of the big 3 publishers who is publishing a lot of stuff electronically, available as paid download PDFs, things that they wouldn't be able to afford to put into print. And then the things that actually sell pretty well, they then put into print when they've proved themselves electronically. And it enables them to expand the repertoire more than they might otherwise be able to do commercially, because they've all pulled in their horns in recent years. The recession, I think, has taken quite a large toll, and now this is another growth area. But one of the problems associated with that, it seems to me, is that a lot of people still have a desperate desire to be published. And there are lots of people writing music in our parishes, and their ministry is very useful and fulfilling for them and for their communities, but it may not be applicable on a wider basis. Sometimes it's difficult for them to learn that lesson, and that we can't all be like name your favorite composer, because there just isn't room for that apart from anything else.
But are there market forces diversifying the field of composition? Anyone can now be a publisher. All you need is your own computer and you can put it online. So I'm not sure that the big 3 are as exclusive as they once would have been. I think there's probably more things going on informally.
A lot of people are self-publishing, I think. I certainly do. I don't know, Rory, if...
I haven't actually tried it yet, but you're right. It's changed, and it's much more easy now, not just to create the music, but for instance, at a place like J.W. Pepper, which has its own a part of its own website, enables a composer to sell his music or her music online without using a third party. Now that, of course, is never going to necessarily get a piece into a hymnal, but the middleman, as it were, is sort of cut out there, and it's just you and J.W. Pepper, or there are other ones too, putting the music out there.
And I also see a greater growth, not very much yet, but significant in ecumenical relationships. There are publishers like Augsburg and Concordia that have been taking on Catholic pieces, and we've been taking on some of their repertoire. So there's more of an interchange, which I think is very healthy.
It is. What do you think are the needs out there that composers should address? So if you were to give advice to upcoming composers, what would you say? Do we need more responsorial psalms, or more hymns, or more mass settings, or more choral anthems?
I feel like we're just at the beginning of the place where I'd also like to say we're at the end of it, but of the Roman Missal, we're just getting comfortable with actually putting those texts in our mouths. And I think that kind of the first round, with very few exceptions, of music that was out there was, kind of created and, the best you could, looking at the pieces, but you hadn't actually prayed with those words and spoken them. And so it's been taken a while for that to turn around. I think that's probably going to be something, although I don't think any of us would weep if they were changed again into something that maybe would be, I say this as respectfully as possible, but is a little easier to sing, a little easier to set, a little easier to speak. Some of those things.
On that point, let's talk about the new translation of the Gloria. Some people would say that, it doesn't have a regular, sort of Grail-like rhythm to it, and that's a problem. Other people would say that's the kind of thing that inspires my creativity. What has been your experience of that?
I think when it's rhythmically difficult and when it doesn't come across as a kind of natural English flow that you would expect, then Gélino used to say, as part of my creative act, I actually need to adapt texts slightly in order to make them work in terms of sung prayer for people. And he was quite open about it. Well,
yeah, right.
But in fact, priests are doing that. Priests are not praying the texts that are in the Missal by any manner of means. I mean, some of them are sticking exactly to what's there. I find a lot of pastors who are unconsciously adding little connective tissue words to improve the flow without realizing they're doing it. And when you go up to them afterwards and say, do you realize that you did this and this and this, they say, no, I stuck absolutely to the text in the book, and they didn't. And I think that that composers have been doing a little bit of that, trying to, but the approval processes that we have are not totally friendly in that respect.
Rory, what's your experience with the new Gloria text?
I've only tried setting it twice, and I ended up, in both cases, setting the, outside of the refrain, setting the verse text to chant tones.
Yeah.
One a unison chant tone and one a choral chant tone, more like Anglican chant.
Homophonic.
Yeah. I didn't hear what you said, I'm sorry.
Homophonic.
Homophonic, yeah. So those were the way that I approached it, because I thought rhythmically it was way more difficult than I had time or desire to put my effort into. It's something that I'd like to do, but again, I think for reasons I really don't want to say right now, my experience with the Gloria, how can I say this, is not as frequent as one might expect from someone who attends 4 masses every weekend.
Okay. If you're okay with that.
I would like to add something, taking up what you were saying about the amount of material which has been coming out, and the fact that this is just the first wave. I mean, in if you like, the good old days, a composer would write a mass setting, they would learn the lesson from that and apply it to the next one, and then learn the lessons from that, and so on. And over 40 years, we refined our craft. We honed it. what happened when the new text came out was that publishers produced, in the space of 12 or 18 months, the equivalent amount of material that they'd published in the previous 40 years. And nobody was learning any lessons. They were just getting stuff out there as fast as they could, so that the market could be captured and all that kind of stuff. And I think that we suffered from that. A lot of stuff was written in a hurry. I think the best wine is still, some way down the road.
So you would say, let's keep looking at mass settings and improving, and you're hoping the next round will be even better.
I think so. I mean, out of the original ones that happened in the 1970s, probably only 2 or 3 in this country survived. Richard Prue, maybe a few others. There was another wave in the 80s, and so it went on. I think that will happen again if we keep the same texts. But the publishers are driving a lot of stuff.
For good or for ill? What's the implication of that?
I don't know whether you can actually quantify it in those terms, but my experience, and I'm published by all 3 of them and Liturgical Press, is that they are all looking for slightly different things. And once you actually identify what those things are, you're more likely to be successful in getting them to accept something that you've written, whatever it happens to be.
In a general way, Paul, could you share with us what are the sorts of things publishers are looking for? Or what are some of the varieties of things?
At the moment, I think there's a big market for music for children of different kinds. I mean, you only have to look at what, Christopher Walker and Sister Paul Freeberg have managed to do. And I mean, there are lots of other people who are writing music which is aimed at that level. I don't know what the future of praise and worship music is, though, and we're getting a lot more Christian contemporary music.
Is it fair to say that's not your thing? I assume you're respectful of it, but it's not your background?
But I'm not sure whether it actually fits into a liturgical context.
That's the question.
And it seems to me, that a lot of it is very personalistic, individualistic. It talks about me and God in a way that isn't communal, if you like. And our young people, I find, are getting increasingly interested in practices which we thought had gone, like adoration, which have now come back. And I think in that kind of context, that kind of music has a place. Whether it has
As we'll see tonight, in fact. Isn't it tonight that we have the Holy Hour with praise and worship music for the monstrance?
But whether it has a place in a communal celebration of Eucharist is a different question. I don't think we've really tried to tackle that yet. People experience things at concerts, at festivals, online, and a lot of it is in a concert context with a star performer leading and all that kind of thing, and even applause. They like it, they have a great experience, they want to translate that into the liturgies that they celebrate, and they don't see. It's quite difficult to do that. Yeah.
Do you have a thought on that point, Rory?
I don't really have that much to do with the contemporary Christian side either. For myself, I feel like what I would like to kind of spend my time on, and what I try to do, is maybe to bring into musical form ways people can sing about the gospel again. To try to do a musical version of new evangelization, which I think is really the old evangelization with a new title. But just trying to get back to the gospel in ways of expressing the preaching of Jesus about the reign of God, and trying to get back to a kind of faith in our song that, maybe I think we started off in the 70s. St. Louis Jesuits trying to bring scripture back into our music, and I think they did a good job of that. I think that kind of what I've been trying to do is kind of along the same lines, maybe taking it a step further, and maybe being maybe more like a homiletic approach or a catechetical approach that's built into those texts, and by putting different texts together in much the same way the lectionary does. To try to, express something that I think the same thing that I guess that the thing that I want to try to do is to help people experience music in such a way that it actually doesn't end when they go out the doors, but just like the rest of the liturgy, tries to help people live a different kind of life and come back and be refreshed and renewed and and filled again with the Holy Spirit and sent out again to do the kind of missionary thing in the world that the gospel calls us to do. By them, I mean us.
Yeah. So it underpins prayer, but at the same time, it challenges people to do something in their lives. It's not just about singing holy things in church and then saying goodbye, God. Thank you. We've had a very lovely time. Now we're going to go and do something different.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up my next question, which was a bit of a shifting gears, but I would observe that in some of the more traditionalist circles, Reform of the Reform, there is an effort to write in a more Catholic or sacred style. And some of it, in my judgment, is interesting music, but some of it's rather bland and uninteresting, and even sort of second or third rate. So I want to pose the question to either of you: what is an appropriate way to be inspired by the tradition, the Western tradition? Richard Prue did that, but he always added in a little bit of spice, and he always had an eye to the congregation.
Yeah, I would go along with that. And for me, it's not about being traditional or sacral or anything like that. For me, the root is modality, and I think probably virtually everything I've written in the past however many years has had some kind of a modal base to it, even if it hasn't been always very obvious. So that's where I tap into the tradition. But I don't want to write cod, imitation music of a Palestrina or anything like that, because I don't think that, we all did that when we did our degrees and diplomas. We don't need to carry on foisting that on people, because Palestrina was much better than anything I could write, so why even try?
But I don't hear you dismissing Palestrina. I'm guessing that everything that you learned by studying Palestrina is informing your work?
Absolutely, yeah.
How?
I think it's again about craft. It's about compositional technique. It's about color, tone color. It's about word setting, all that kind of thing.
Rory, are you inspired by traditional classical music, or do you see your inspiration more in other sources that are folk or ethnic?
I don't really know. I guess there are a lot of categories of music, but I honestly, in my life has been filled with so many different styles of music at every juncture that I kind of feel like, I don't know, I don't really have a strong feeling about it. To me, music is music, and whatever happens when I'm writing, that's...
And I mean, we write in different styles.
Yeah.
I mean, I write across the spectrum. Don't always do it terribly well, but
even within solitude, there's a range there.
Oh, there
are
is.
influences of spirituals and French
and
chorales.
That was very deliberate. I mean, that was in order to stop the antiphon psalm form from becoming totally boring, which it would have been. Just adding that little tweak.
And you had the added piece, though, of having several people working on that together.
Yeah.
So you were influenced not only by your influences, but the sort of the exponential influences of having 5 or 6 or however many.
We started off with 2 rock musicians and 3 people from the chant tradition, which is a very interesting combination.
Yes, indeed.
Throw in a few
it worked.
Indian ragas.
The chemistry worked. I want my last question to be a totally different one, and it's this. I don't do a lot of composing, but I do some. And I wrote these very simple English chant antiphons, and then I'll be in a setting where if I'm the speaker, they want to use some of my music there at their morning prayer. So I see someone, how shall I say, interpret it differently than I had in mind, about 3 times slower than I thought. And, I didn't write a German Lutheran chorale, thank you very much. Is this just part of the asceticism of a composer, that once I compose, I have to let go of it and it's people's?
I think you do. I said in print when I was being interviewed about the hymn for the Holy Year of Mercy that you get very used to hearing people slaughtering your music. And you have to keep telling yourself they are praying through it. However much it may displease you and not be in accordance with what you originally thought, it's doing something for them. What it's doing, I don't know, but I assume that it's taking them closer to God in some way. I think that's all you can do, apart from running and screaming from the church, tearing your hair out.
That's a really great thought, though, Paul. I mean, that's a very, I think, open-hearted and charitable way of thinking of something that can be a very difficult time, but assuming that everybody's working in good faith, that's exactly the truth. And
Chris Walker used to talk about it, hearing one of his Holy Holies, which was written in 3/4, always was done in 4/4 in this particular church whenever he went visiting, and they added an extra beat in every measure.
Well, I celebrate Mass at the county jail, and the Mass parts are in the same time signature as the opening hymn, I found. So we'll get glory, glory.
I find that in Texan parishes, actually. I mean, at the north end of Texas, I visited one parish where everything was accompanied by a waltz. Basically, it didn't matter what it was, what time signature it was in. It was all ba ba ba. It's fascinating.
Well, Palestrina probably dealt with something similar in his time.
Believe me, I'm sure he has. I probably conducted some of it.
So on that note, we'll wrap up. Hey, thanks for a great conversation. Thanks, Rory.
You for
Thanks, Paul.
inviting us.
God
Thanks
bless
for all
your work.
Thank you.